ugly bill, the administration's actions have ultimately caused more harm than good for the American people. Reports show that since taking office, President Trump has raised the average cost of living. Health insurance costs have risen by hundreds of dollars for the average person, with insurance plans increasing by more than 20%. Housing costs remain at an all-time high. And everyday grocery items show a steady increase, with prices rising by 15 to 20%. We cannot pick and choose when to care for the American people. The actions of this administration show a pattern. They first target our most vulnerable communities and then gut the very resources to help.
A congressional hearing meant to examine federal spending quickly turned into a sharp warning about what could be lost if proposed childcare and social service cuts move forward. Representative Wesley Bell used his time to deliver a broad and pointed critique of President Trump's proposed reductions to childcare funding and other social services, arguing that these cuts would land hardest on families who are already struggling to keep up with the rising cost of living. If you value clear explanations of how Washington decisions affect everyday families, take a moment to subscribe so you do not miss future coverage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member, and our witnesses for being here today. I believe in protecting our social services and recognize the need for comprehensive legislation that ensures transparency in the collection and use of federal funds to support these critical programs that serve our communities in need. The resources provided through social services ensure the welfare of the everyday person and family, and these resources and individuals deserve to be protected. These protections should come at all times, not just when politically beneficial. What we're witnessing from President Trump and this administration is an attempt to use social services and the welfare of the American people as pawns to promote their political agenda. Instead of caring for the challenges of the average person, this administration has deprived them of the very things that the president promised, which is affordable health care, housing, and relief from the rising cost of living. Through rolling back essential health care affordability, cutting funding for assistance programs, implementing harmful tariffs, and advancing legislation such as the One Big Ugly Bill, the administration's actions have ultimately caused more harm than good for the American people. Reports show that since taking office, President Trump has raised the average cost of living. Health insurance costs have risen by hundreds of dollars for the average person, with insurance plans increasing by more than 20%. Housing costs remain at an all-time high. And everyday grocery items show a steady increase, with prices rising by 15 to 20%. We cannot pick and choose when to care for the American people. The actions of this administration show a pattern. They first target our most vulnerable communities and then gut the very resources to help them. Today, it is our Somali communities and our child care assistance. Tomorrow, it could be your communities and the resources you and your family rely on for well-being. At its core, this is about the well-being of the American people. If we truly cared about those we have sworn to represent, we would be working to dismantle all the challenges they face, not just the ones that serve political interests. Mr. Balu, President Trump has recently made comments on efforts to freeze child care funding in California, Colorado, Illinois, and New York. Would these actions benefit or harm children and families?
Oh, of course they're going to harm it.
President Trump has fired thousands of employees across critical departments and has issued Executive Order 14356, restricting agencies from filling vacant positions or creating new ones unless approved under the order or required by law. Can you speak to how these actions could harm the government's ability to root out waste, fraud, and abuse?
Absolutely. So, it's going to make it harder both to administer these services and then to identify fraud in the first place. One of the things that I'm particularly concerned about is to go after fraud. One of the easiest ways to do it is to prosecute tax crimes. The challenge that we've got right now is the administration has announced a plan to disband the tax division of the Department of Justice entirely. And that's going to make it much harder to prosecute these sorts of crimes.
And can you speak from your work as a federal prosecutor on how President Trump's actions have contradicted his promises to the American people?
Well, to the extent that this administration says that it cares about waste, fraud, and abuse, it seems like that is a selective care. You can look at cases like Paul Walzak, who was convicted of fraud and withheld $10 million to his own employees in nursing homes. His mother attended a $1 million plate fundraiser with the president, and Mr. Walzak was quickly pardoned. This has happened literally dozens of times where favored defendants either had their prosecutions dropped or were pardoned entirely.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Grofman from Wisconsin.
Sure. I'm sorry we had another briefing in the building, so I don't want to go over past things. But during your initial testimony, Ms. Rarick, you talked about people being threatened who are whistleblowers.
Bell framed the issue not as a partisan fight, but as a question of responsibility. He emphasized that social services exist to protect families, children, seniors, and working people, and that transparency and accountability should strengthen these programs, not weaken them. According to Bell, protecting social services should not depend on whether doing so is politically convenient. He accused the Trump administration of treating social services as bargaining chips rather than lifelines. Bell argued that while the president has promised affordable health care, housing relief, and lower costs, the administration's actions tell a different story. He pointed to proposed cuts to assistance programs, the rollback of health care affordability measures, the use of tariffs that raise consumer prices, and the advancement of sweeping legislation that critics say benefits political priorities over public need. Subscribe if you want continued reporting that connects campaign promises to real policy outcomes. To underscore his point, Bell cited reports showing that the cost of living has continued to rise. Health insurance premiums have increased significantly for many Americans. Housing costs remain historically high, and grocery prices have climbed sharply, stretching family budgets thinner each month. Against that backdrop, Bell warned that cutting childcare funding would only deepen financial strain for parents trying to work, care for their children, and stay afloat. Bell stressed that the pattern is familiar. He said administrations often begin by targeting the most vulnerable communities, then gradually reduce the very programs designed to support them. Today, he warned, it is childcare assistance and immigrant communities. Tomorrow, it could be any community relying on federal support to meet basic needs. Turning to recent actions, Bell referenced President Trump's comments about freezing childcare funding in states including California, Colorado, Illinois, and New York. When asked whether such freezes would help or harm families, witnesses made clear that the impact would be harmful, limiting access to care, forcing parents out of the workforce, and placing additional pressure on already overstretched providers. If you want deeper insight into how these policies ripple through local economies, make sure you are subscribed. The discussion then shifted to the administration's broader approach to government oversight. Bell raised concerns about mass firings across federal agencies and an executive order restricting the ability to fill vacant positions. He questioned how agencies could effectively combat waste, fraud, and abuse when staffing is reduced and enforcement capacity is weakened. A former federal prosecutor on the panel explained that fewer staff means fewer investigations and weaker enforcement. One key example involved tax crimes, often one of the most effective tools for uncovering fraud. The witness warned that plans to dismantle the Department of Justice's tax division would make it far harder to prosecute financial misconduct. Bell pressed further, asking how these actions square with promises to protect taxpayers. The response pointed to what the witness described as selective enforcement, where favored individuals see charges dropped or receive pardons, while broader accountability efforts are scaled back. By the time Bell yielded his time, the central message was clear. This debate is not just about numbers in a budget. It is about whether the federal government prioritizes the well-being of children and families or uses essential services as leverage in political battles. As childcare costs rise and families struggle to balance work and caregiving, the outcome of these funding decisions could shape lives far beyond Washington. If you want ongoing coverage that explains not just what lawmakers say, but what their choices mean for real people, be sure to subscribe.